When you hear the name Leonardo da Vinci, what comes to mind? Probably the Mona Lisa, right? Or the Last Supper. But the painter, the scientist, the inventor, who is the actual man behind that legend? How did one person come to be the living, breathing symbol of an entire era? Well, let's dig in and trace the path of the man who became the ultimate Renaissance man.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to look at 4 key stages of his incredible life. We'll start with his really unlikely beginnings, then move to his intense apprenticeship in Florence, see him become this multi-talented expert in a duke's court, and finally try to make sense of the complex and often unfinished legacy he left for us.
And this whole story it boils down to one central question, a puzzle that defined his entire life. How did an illegitimate son, someone born outside the normal paths to success, become the very definition of genius and creativity?
To get to the bottom of that, we have to go way back to the very beginning. We're starting out in the quiet hills of Tuscany, a long way from the centers of art and power.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1452 in a little town called Vinci. Leonardo is born. His dad, Ser Piero, is a pretty important legal professional, but his mom, Caterina, is a young woman from a much humbler background, and because they weren't married, he was separated from his mother when he was just a year old. He was raised by his grandparents, and then at 12, when they died, he's uprooted again to go live with a father he barely knew in the big, bustling city of Florence. But that move to Florence, that was everything. It set the stage for his entire life.
Now, what's so wild is how this one single fact, his illegitimate status, shaped his whole destiny. See, back then, that meant he couldn't follow in his father's footsteps and become a notary. And going to a university? Forget about it. With all those traditional doors basically slammed shut, his father had to get creative to find an outlet for Leonardo's obvious talents.
And that creative path? Well, it led him straight into the beating heart of the Italian Renaissance, an artist's workshop in Florence.
You have to understand, Florence in the 15th century was the absolute ground zero for a cultural explosion we call the Renaissance. You had these super rich banking families, like the Medicis, who were pouring insane amounts of money into art. It wasn't just about religion anymore, it was a status symbol. They were creating a market, a real demand for genius. And that's the world that teenage Leonardo stepped right into.
So at 14, he becomes an apprentice in the workshop, the bottega, of a guy named Andrea del Verrocchio. And this tells you so much about how artists were trained. This wasn't some quiet studio. It was a hands-on, get-your-hands-dirty education in everything. He was learning chemistry by grinding pigments, metallurgy by casting bronze statues, and engineering right alongside drawing. He wasn't being trained to be a fine artist, he was being trained to be a master craftsman who could make anything.
And his talent was off the charts, no question. But, and this is a big but, a certain pattern started to emerge, and it started early. In 1481, he gets this big commission to paint the Adoration of the Magi. He sketches out this groundbreaking, amazing composition, and then he just leaves Florence. The painting, never finished. This would become a theme for him. Maybe his mind was just always racing ahead to the next big idea, more interested in solving the problem than in the boring work of actually finishing the project.
Yeah, and people noticed this habit, especially his rivals. The most famous one, of course, was Michelangelo. And these two guys could not have been more different. They were like night and day. People said Leonardo was quiet, thoughtful, always elegantly dressed. Michelangelo, boastful, rude, and kind of messy. And Michelangelo was not shy about publicly calling out Leonardo for not finishing his work.
But Leonardo was getting restless. He wasn't content to just be a painter in Florence's competitive art scene. His next move would take him to a place where all his different skills and his huge ambitions could really shine. So around 1481, he packs his bags for Milan to work for the Duke, Ludovico Sforza. And you have got to hear what he put on his resume for the Duke. In his letter, he lists all the things he can do. He leads with his skills as a military engineer, designing catapults and tanks. Then he mentions architecture, hydraulics, sculpture, even that he's a musician. And painting? It's almost an afterthought, stuck at the very end of the list. This is the moment, right here, where Leonardo transforms from just an artist into a true polymath.
It was in Milan where he created one of his most iconic masterpieces, The Last Supper. But the story behind it perfectly sums up Leonardo's genius and, honestly, his fatal flaw. Instead of using the tried-and-true fresco technique, he just had to experiment, using a weird mix of oil and tempera paint right onto a dry wall. His need to innovate created this breathtaking work of art, but the experiment failed big time. The paint started flaking off the wall almost as soon as he finished it.
His time in Milan wasn't just about big art projects either. This is when his scientific curiosity just went into overdrive. He wasn't just studying anatomy to be a better painter anymore. No, he was dissecting human bodies, more than 30 of them, out of a pure, intense desire to figure out how the human machine actually worked. He was working with mathematicians on the golden ratio and sketching these radical new designs for churches. Which brings us to the last chapter of his life, and the absolutely mind-blowing legacy he left behind. A legacy that, for the most part, was locked away from the world for hundreds of years. After leaving Milan, he started painting what is maybe the most famous face in the world, the Mona Lisa, and the story behind it is just bizarre. It was probably a commission. Someone paid him to paint it, but he never delivered it. He just kept it, tinkering with it for years and years, carrying it around with him wherever he went, right up until the day he died.
But the greatest treasure he left behind wasn't a painting at all. It was his notebooks. It's estimated he wrote and sketched on about 20,000 pages in his lifetime. Today, we have about 7,000 of them. And inside those pages is the entire universe of his mind.
I mean, flipping through these notebooks is literally like time travel. You see these stunningly accurate drawings of human anatomy. You see studies on how water flows that physicists still look at today. You see designs for flying machines and even a parachute hundreds of years ahead of their time. And he's making observations about geology and fossils that completely contradicted what people believed back then.
And this quote from Leonardo himself, it just nails it. It's the key to understanding his whole worldview. For him, there was no line between art and science. They were the same thing. His personal mission was to prove that art was a science, a rigorous, powerful way to observe, understand, and then recreate the world around us.
So, where does that leave us? We're back to that big question. Was Leonardo da Vinci the ultimate Renaissance man, a true genius whose curiosity had no limits? Or was he this brilliant but frustrating figure whose scattered focus and endless unfinished projects actually limited his real impact on the world? It's a debate that's still going on, leaving us to just wonder at the dazzling, complicated, and fragmented legacy he left behind.